Okay, so a big week for Microsoft. Phil Spencer has done a couple of interviews, the big one being with Bloomberg, where a whole manner of topics have come to the fore. I think the big one, well, there's talk about the Xbox handheld, which is all but confirmed now, but seemingly several years away, which is
Hmm.
something we didn't expect. But there's also the concept of quote unquote no red lines on which Xbox games are going to be moving out to other platforms. And at the same time, there's been a new marketing campaign. I'd say this marketing campaign makes a lot of sense to people outside of the core console industry, but probably riles up people who are invested in the Xbox ecosystem. This idea that this is an Xbox and it basically brings up a whole bunch of devices that historically have not been Xboxes. Basically the transitionary period from Microsoft and Xbox is proceeding apace. And John, I'm going to come to you first. What do you make of all of this?
Well, first, Rich, this is not an Xbox currently. I'm holding up a Steam Deck, but it could become one if you install the right software.
Right?
What do I make of this? Well, it's just, I feel like to really look at all of this, we need to like kind of just talk about Xbox of 2024 in general. And if you look at the last 12 months, how much they've pivoted, but how it's kind of all rolled out somewhat slowly, right? Like it's clear that they're trying to shift the entire business into a new direction. I mean, in this new ad campaign is sort of like the cherry on that, where it's like, oh yeah, this is clearly the idea is, Xbox is now a platform for games as opposed to a specific piece of hardware. But if you go back to 2023 November, I don't think this line of thinking really existed in the public yet. I don't think people were thinking like, oh yeah, like Xbox is becoming this thing. And what a difficult journey this must have been for them. Like for whatever the reasons are for going down this path, to go from being like a specific piece of hardware, a company that's holding like these fan fests specifically around it. You've got like dedicated fan bases just like loving your specific thing, but because of market conditions for multiple reasons, you've had to change. They've had to figure out a way to essentially slowly rip off that band-aid and like say, hey, we're transforming the business into something different. Uh, and
Right.
you can feel it. Like the response from the community has been it feels like it was strong at first, but it's increasingly kind of died off. And I think people are slowly just kind of accepting now that this is what Microsoft has opted to turn the Xbox business into. Um,
Right.
so that's interesting. And the fact that they say no red lines on exclusives also kind of goes against, I don't know if it goes against, but you remember earlier this year, right? The whole thing kicked off with the rumors about those four games coming to other platforms, right? Like
Yeah.
Sea of Thieves and Hi-Fi Rush and whatnot. And Phil was like, oh, we're only talking about these four games. We're not talking about like Starfield or Indiana. I can't remember. Was it Indiana Jones? I can't remember which names he specifically dropped, but it was like, we're not talking about those yet. But now we know Indiana Jones is coming to PlayStation. And now like we very clearly say, hey, there's no red lines anymore. That starts to mean like, okay, anything is good to go. Are we going to see Halo on the PlayStation? It's starting to feel like yes, which
Well, we do have a comment there. I mean, I'm looking at the Bloomberg interview now, and the exact quote, and I think it is worth getting the exact quote
let's
out
get the
there.
exact quote. You're right. Read it, Rich.
I do not see sort of red lines in our portfolio that says "thou must not." Um, that's literally the quote. I mean, the issue with this Bloomberg interview is that it's kind of cherry picked quotes and then
Mm,
summaries of what he said. And after that, the Bloomberg article reads, "It's too early to make any sort of decision on the next version of Halo." Um, from my perspective, though, if you're putting out a campaign that says this is an Xbox, this is an Xbox, this is an Xbox, when it's basically a move of the platform to any kind of gaming device that can host those games, then basically that kind of says to me the decision has been made not just on Halo but on every
on
game.
every game.
Because let's say I've got one of those devices that's only going to get Indiana Jones, 6 months or 3 months later, rather, there will be consumer confusion. It's like, well, you guys said I've got an Xbox because, this piece of hardware can run it. Why do I have to wait 3 months to play the game that you said I could play? Is it an Xbox or isn't
Well,
it?
Rich,
So I think, go on.
I think that's actually a very important point. And a part of the discussion is, what does that really mean? Does it mean this is a piece of hardware that can run Xbox games, or is this a piece of hardware that has Game Pass?
Well,
That's different.
Xbox isn't just Game Pass, though. That's the
I
thing.
agree, but like, what are they trying to pick here in terms of saying like this is an Xbox and this is not, right? Like, that's kind of the thing I've been going back and forth on. When you look at the specific pieces of hardware that they show, well, I guess then again they did show the Oculus or the Meta Quest 3 as part of that campaign, right? So maybe then it is not that, like, because a lot of people were like, hey, it's Game Pass. That's what Xbox is now. But if you count like the Quest 3 and if you throw in the PS5, then maybe it is more expensive. And then we get back to your point there, Rich, about the people having to wait 3 months. Is it an Xbox or isn't it?
Well, it's an Xbox on some sort of time delay system. It doesn't quite make sense to me. You're either all in or you're not all in, and basically the direction of travel suggests that they're all in, and it's just basically a matter of time. And if that's the way forward, that's fine. I can see that a lot of people would be quite upset by this campaign, though. The people who've been invested in the ecosystem for many years, possibly decades. The console was always the center of the ecosystem. It was always the focus, but suddenly it's not the focus anymore. And this kind of makes sense if you're looking at things from a kind of, meta view. There's an increasing amount of research that younger users, are gaming on mobile phones. And then, the enthusiasts there are moving to gaming laptops or desktops, PC, in other words. PC is an Xbox, I guess, because it's day and date on all first party games, right? So that kind of makes sense. But that's consoles. It doesn't seem to be a priority for a different generation of gamers, and I think it's kind of weird that the console generation, the console audience is getting progressively older, and the PC audience seems to be opening up and getting wider. I think this is why we're seeing this kind of strategy. Oliver, what do you think about all of this? I think what we're looking at is like a further step along in sort of the transition here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with the underlying strategy of targeting streaming PCs, PS5s, mobile devices. I think it makes sense from Microsoft's perspective. It's kind of a natural extension of Microsoft's business in the sense that they're kind of like everywhere all at once with their services, with their platforms. That's kind of been the push from Satya Nadella. But I think part of the problem here for Microsoft that I kind of am trying to figure out exactly how they differentiate themselves here is that Sony has been able to replicate it to a substantial degree without seemingly a ton of difficulty on the platform side. Like their streaming platform is better than Microsoft streaming from what I understand. They have a good subscription game outlet there. And if they wanted to do day and date releases, they could feasibly if that's something that they wanted to accomplish there. And then they have all these exclusive titles, which Microsoft has still had a little bit of difficulty reaching that level of quality and consistency in their first party output. So I kind of have a bit of a question there in terms of how Microsoft moves forward and differentiates themselves. One obvious answer would be PC, but actually harnessing PC in a way that it's adaptable to multiple form factors and works for people, I think is tough. And then you have SteamOS there. You have other competitors that might be coming in. And I think that makes things more difficult. In terms of exclusives, I think the writing has been on the wall basically since Microsoft's initial rumors back in January, February of this year that their titles would be coming to PlayStation. I assumed from that point onwards, basically everything would be coming, because if a title like Sea of Thieves is successful on PlayStation, why wouldn't a title like Microsoft Flight Simulator or Avowed or Halo or whatever, right? It seems like a natural extension of that business. In terms of that whole ad campaign, I do find it funny. It's kind of a reflection of where Microsoft is at the moment with respect to their console business. I'm sort of surprised that they didn't have, probably presumably Sony would get upset, but why they didn't have a PlayStation on that ad as well, saying this is an Xbox, because perhaps that'll be the future at some point soon with day and date releases on PlayStation there. Ultimately, I guess I don't have a problem with it personally. Obviously, I like consoles. I like PC. I don't like streaming as much. I'm fine with streaming if the quality is good, like in-home streaming through Moonlight. That's great. GeForce Now is quite good as well. I'm fine with that. I think xCloud needs to get better if Microsoft really wants to push this and have this be like a really viable gaming push for, especially for the more hardcore gamers. But yeah, ultimately, I guess this is where things are going. And I think from Microsoft's perspective, it makes a lot of sense not to be too invested in a hardware platform that's not very successful. But I guess we're just going to have to see how well that actually works out in practice, because I think Microsoft's answers to these questions of like how you play games across platforms, they're not too great at the moment, in my opinion, but we'll have to see how that progresses.
The cloud thing is interesting because Microsoft, I suspect that they're seeing some pretty decent growth on cloud at the moment. They're making a lot of moves there. In terms of the PlayStation alternative, they've got a 4K streaming platform, but it's only on PlayStation. You actually have to have a PlayStation to stream, which doesn't really make sense. Latency on Xbox is better than PlayStation. I think that's pretty crucial. The issue that I have with xCloud, and I think we've said it in the past, is just that the visual quality just isn't good enough. That's the problem that I have with it. Is it a bandwidth problem? Is it an encoder issue? But when I'm looking at the startup screen, the menu screen for Starfield, and those that graduated tint in the background is artifacting. That's just on a static screen. That's problematic. And yeah, basically quality just needs to improve across the board there for it to become viable. Personally, if you want to get into, I mean, I know this is not the audience, but if you want to get into Xbox cheaply, get a secondhand Series S. That's so cheap, and you get so much for that money. That's just what I'd say about that. Any additional thoughts? I mean, obviously on this interview we had kind of like confirmation that we've got a handheld coming, but the expectation has been that Phil has been trailing it for so long that it might be happening quite soon. But instead, he's saying it's a few years out, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Oliver?
Yeah, I am actually really surprised it's going to take them that long, apparently, to get a product to market. Because if you wanted to just slap Windows on some well-designed handheld PC hardware with a commodity SoC like Phoenix or whatever, right? It might be at that point. That seems like a shorter-term project, especially if you might imagine work would maybe start in 2022 on that after the success of the Steam Deck, possibly revealed that there is a strong market for those kinds of devices and spurred other manufacturers to get into that business. To me, 26 or maybe 27 or whatever that might be suggests a device with a larger scope, like maybe custom SoC, maybe more heavily adapted Windows, maybe something more Xbox focused, something that ties into a next-gen console. I think it is a more ambitious project, I'd have to assume. If it does end up launching it, it is basically just another Windows device that is commodity hardware and no special adaptations or anything like that. I think that's going to be a bit of a disappointment. But like right now, I mean, if you look at something like the ROG Ally and you get rid of Windows and you put Bazzite on it.
Well, that's the key thing.
Yeah,
right.
Get rid of Windows.
Yeah, that's a pretty, the hardware is pretty good. Could it be better? Could it be more comfortable? Absolutely. Could the display be OLED instead of LCD? Absolutely. There's some things you could look at that. Could the performance be better? I'm sure it could be with the next generation SoC. But like, that's a pretty good product right now. And the operating system is really the thing that's holding them back. So I kind of wonder if maybe that's the area of some concern. Because otherwise, if I'm Microsoft, I'm thinking, let's launch a device a little bit sooner. We can probably get it out the door and have it be a good quality device, and then iterate on that device into the next few years. That's what I would think about. But I have to assume that some of the holdup there is on the operating system side of things, or maybe on the platform side of things with integration with the next Xbox. That's what I would assume, at least. So hopefully they do something ambitious there that's interesting and does justify that wait.
Okay, but Oliver, let me put this to you. What if, in terms of that first device, it's already out there and it's called the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go, and it is basically, first of all, to sort out the software problem, because that seems to be the gist that I'm getting from the interview, where they're saying the Xbox app is good, but it could be better. That does suggest there's going to be some movement on the software side of things. I don't think that's movement enough if it's just the Xbox app, because there's fundamental issues with Windows as a whole. Windows kind of needs to be stripped down and rebuilt almost to eliminate some of the many problems that we've seen with it. And it is kind of weird, especially in light of the Bazzite work that you did on the ROG Ally, which basically shows that with Linux, there's a good to go system, basically.
Yeah.
And Microsoft is so behind.
To me, just improving the Xbox app, that's like a tiny fraction of their problems. To make Windows work for gaming handhelds, I think there are a lot of things. I think the number one thing they need to do is to build an interface that basically works as an end-to-end solution without ever needing to dip into a desktop interface. I think that's critical. That's something that SteamOS does quite well. They also need to smooth out driver annoyances, like updating your drivers across the stack. On Bazzite and SteamOS, you click an update button and you get all the updates delivered to you immediately with a very short and brief update process. And that is a very good experience there. You also need to sort out shader compilation problems. On SteamOS, Valve has Fossilize, which essentially solves that issue quite well. And you need to sort out other kind of Xbox and Windows Game Pass issues, like login problems and issues with the Xbox app that are kind of long-standing and do need some sorting out. So I think that Windows does need to improve in a lot of areas. To me, it is not an Xbox app problem. It is a whole operating system and even approach towards some issues like shader compilation and things like this that need to improve across the entire operating system. And so, yeah, it is a really big effort, and I hope they have a much more comprehensive plan of action there.
Yep. Mm-hmm. John, I mean, I gave you a Windows handheld, and there's no denying the power there versus Steam Deck, but the actual day-to-day operation of the device, it's just off-putting, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also interested to try Bazzite on that thing because I think that could really bring it to life. I think everything you were saying, Oliver, holds true, but I feel like I feel like the base here is more like take the Xbox interface experience from the current Xbox consoles and essentially have a separate mode of operation for Windows, similar to SteamOS, right? How you boot into the game mode versus the desktop mode. And I feel like the game mode needs to be its own separate thing and not just an app that you launch within Windows. Because having to boot to a Windows desktop at all for a gaming experience is not good. It's not an experience that really works all that well. But so essentially I feel like that's the point, is like they need to take that Xbox experience and work more features into it to allow it to function more on computer-like devices, right? Allow more access to Windows-like features comfortably from within that Xbox interface. And like you say, they need to sort the shader compilation stuff, and they absolutely need to sort the driver update stuff. Because you're right. I mean, it's easier on something like a Steam Deck, right? Where it's fixed hardware, but with Bazzite and everything as well, it's quite good. But obviously the big problem with PC is that there's also there's just so much hardware variations that can exist. So how do they make this work? And is this something that would be limited to just specific pieces of hardware and partner hardware? Is this something they could allow for all potential Windows users? Because if they do this, I think a lot of Windows customers are going to be like, oh, I want that, right? I build my own PC. I'd love to use that interface as well. But that becomes harder to support with a wide range of specifications out there. Like even right now, when you look at something like Bazzite, like it's designed for. I mean, it's really not meant to be used like on a normal gaming PC, right?
You can use it on a gaming PC.
You can, but
you can. The experience of installing it and getting it running and everything like that, it really is designed for, as far as I can tell, the most popular Windows gaming handhelds. In particular, the ROG Ally seems to have the smoothest go of it as the most popular Windows gaming handheld, as far as I'm aware at the moment. But you can install it on everything. I'd love to try it on a PC at some point. I'm not sure that it would be as smooth as an experience.
No, exactly. And that's the thing, is Microsoft's gonna, not only are they not as smooth as those current solutions in certain areas, they need to get smoother across a wide range of hardware if they decide to go this fully open. But it could also be like, hey, devices that are now called Xbox, or specific pieces of hardware from different partners. Microsoft themselves can have their own hardware still if they wanted, and it all runs this like sort of like unified version of Windows, where it's like you have this Xbox like interface experience as like the central pillar from which everything runs, with an optional desktop, which would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The final part of the interview I'd like to address is this quote from almost near the end, actually. This quote says, the Xbox business has never been more healthy. Again, it's been paraphrased here. I'm just going to read the paragraph. The Xbox business has never been more healthy, he said, citing growth in cloud and PC gaming as well as console usage. I'd love to have known what is being cited there. The business is performing right now, and I think that means a more healthy future for hardware and the games we build. So, that's interesting, right? Because there's this perception that Microsoft is floundering, but I'm willing to bet that everything that's being said there is absolutely correct. And on this sort of meta scale that involves PC and possibly cloud as well. I mean, we just got no visibility on metrics there. And the fact that they've just launched Black Ops 6, which seems to be doing extremely well. Probably Xbox as a business is in better shape than it's ever been before. It's just this kind of perception of what's happening in the console side of things, right, which is the area of focus for much of the community that's kind of painting a very different picture. That's quite interesting. But we have gone in terms of messaging when those 4 games were announced, and Phil was talking about the 4 games as an experiment. Obviously the leaks were saying something quite different, and now the leaks are sort of coming to pass. So it does suggest that there's this kind of like phased messaging that does eventually end up in Microsoft going fully multi-platform. And I don't really see a problem with that, because if the sort of standard business model for consoles doesn't work for them, then, where do you go next? You've got to try something new. And if you want a console and you want a console ecosystem, there's alternatives to that if you want that, and you'll be able to play Xbox games on those as well. So, it's just kind of like an interesting evolution for Microsoft here. And I think just by virtue of their acquisitions, they've already become a multi-platform publisher, and it's just the way it is, and it's the future.
You saw what happened with Black Ops 6, of course. It's like there were people infighting like, oh, it sold so many copies on PS5, amazing, but then but it's got all these users on Game Pass, and it's like everybody's arguing, but who wins in that scenario? They're selling tons of units on PS5, but they also got tons of people playing on Game Pass. It's a
disaster, John, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So, I think they're doing all right.
Yeah.
Any final words there, Oliver?
My only worry here is I don't want the fundamental user experience to slip. And to me, at least, cloud streaming through xCloud is a bit of a slip in terms of the user experience overall. PC gaming in general, with the UI that's offered there, in a lot of contexts, is a slip in terms of the user experience as well. When you look at what Xbox has delivered historically in this generation, that is to me, at least a pretty good experience, and pretty satisfying, and no hassles, and easy to use. So I hope that's prioritized in the future, whatever their plans may be. And I hope that they do have an attitude, especially with the handhelds, that Windows does need to be fundamentally transformed, and it's not just the Xbox app, because if that's what they think, then I'm going to be installing Bazet on everything until the end of time, or with SteamOS, or whatever the equivalent is, right?
Well, there are foundational issues on PC that in an area that Microsoft curates that they need to sort out. DX12 issues, stutter struggle, the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So maybe it is just like an overall push just to get Windows into a good state for gaming, a better state for gaming. And then, the hardware comes with it. That's a pretty tall order, though, I have to admit.